On a muggy and silent night in the dark swamps of Bywater, where a lively party is happening nearby, a young couple of lovers, Billy and Sarah, decide to drift away from the group and venture deeper into the dense and damp vegetation of the swamps. Billy, worried, asks Sarah to stop and warns her about the dangers lurking in that isolated place, telling old stories about mysterious and inexplicable disappearances that have occurred there over the years, making the area have a dark reputation. Despite the warnings, Sarah presses on, and they come across an old, abandoned canoe, leaning against the shore of the still, dark water. They begin to get intimate, but the movement made by them causes the canoe to drift on its own, slowly, across the water's surface. The water soon begins to bubble and ripple, as if something is moving beneath it, approaching the two. Sarah notices a strange movement behind them, and, in a terrifying moment, Billy is brutally attacked by an invisible creature that drags him into the underbrush. Sarah stands there, paralyzed and covered in blood, shocked and terrified by what she has just witnessed. After a while, the new sheriff of the town, Kyle, arrives in Bywater to take over the position left vacant after the mysterious disappearance of the former sheriff. Kyle is welcomed at the local police station by Eric, a local officer who appears cordial. Eric informs Kyle about the situation in the town and mentions that the former sheriff, Jim Corley, had been showing signs of madness before disappearing without a trace. Kyle is taken to the former sheriff's office, where he observes several missing persons posters and a map of the area marked with the locations of the unexplained attacks. Kyle comments that the disappearances have become too frequent for a small town like Bywater. Eric relates that it all started with a doctor named Salas and recounts the theory of the former sheriff, who believed that Salas had cast a curse over the swamps, which could be behind the deaths and disappearances. Kyle inquires about René Larocque, and Eric explains that Jim believed he was involved with Salas, but they could never catch him to confirm. But Eric doesn't have time to continue the conversation, as he soon receives a call informing that a corpse has been found. The two quickly head to the location, and upon arriving, Eric is visibly shaken as he recognizes the body of the young Billy, and Kyle asks him to step away. Kyle examines the corpse closely and notes something strange about the condition of the body, but the coroner states that it is normal, considering how long the body has been in the swamp. Kyle asks the cause of death, but the coroner says he would like to finish his work and adds that the owner of the local oil company, Mr. Frederick, wants him to go personally with Eric to see what they are facing there. Kyle agrees but asks for a detailed summary on the autopsy, and the coroner agrees. At the oil company, protests are happening, and Sheriff Kyle is called to resolve it. When they arrive, the sheriff and Eric approach two men who are using a loudspeaker. One is Steve, and the other is Jack, Frederick's son, who demands that Kyle arrest everyone. Kyle approaches a woman named Elizabeth, who continues to speak like a parrot. The woman defends her rights and says that Mr. Frederick has been breaking various laws and is never punished for his actions. Kyle then asks for a pair of pliers from one of the officers to cut the chains off the tractors, but Elizabeth kicks him, causing him to fall into the mud. Irritated, Kyle asks if the woman wants to be carried or to walk on her own, and he soon picks her up, placing her in the police car. Shortly after, Mr. Frederick arrives on the scene, asking if Kyle knows who is killing people in the swamp, and asks him to resolve it quickly, as it is affecting his business. Frederick comments that René is a bit crazy and may be involved in the deaths, urging Kyle to arrest him soon. The sheriff states that he needs to conduct his own investigations before arresting anyone, and Frederick simply asks him to do it quickly. That night at the station, Kyle interrogates Elizabeth and discovers that she is a teacher and teaches kindergarten. Kyle asks if that will be a good example for her students, and Elizabeth retorts that fighting for one's ideals is a good example. Elizabeth mentions that that place is where she grew up, and that now she is seeing everything being destroyed by Frederick's greed, and that he never actually bought those lands. Kyle then asks if Elizabeth knows René Larocque, and she responds that the town is small and everyone knows each other. Kyle asks for help in finding him, but Elizabeth replies that it is not that easy to find him. Kyle then decides to release the woman, as he does not want to start his first day by arresting a local teacher. The next morning, Kyle goes to a local restaurant where everyone seems uncomfortable with the sheriff's presence, and he ends up finding Elizabeth, who is having coffee with her friend. Kyle soon approaches Elizabeth, and she asks if he is there for work or just for leisure, and he simply takes a sugar jar, saying he is on break. Elizabeth then introduces her friend named Peter Horn, who greets the sheriff. A man named Mike approaches the sheriff, and Kyle asks if he can help. Mike warns that the sheriff is now in a lawless town, but he intends to help, as long as Kyle goes to his house in the swamp. Soon a man named Wayne approaches, telling Mike to stop making up those stories and asking him to leave with his filthy dogs. Along with his brother Rodney, they sit next to the sheriff, and Wayne starts fiddling with Kyle's badge, which irritates him, and he tells the two to go away. They stare at him for a while, and soon walk off when suddenly the lights in the bar go out. Peter Horn grabs the sheriff's arm and warns him that there is something out there and that he cannot face it alone. Kyle asks what is out there, and Peter merely draws a strange symbol with the sugar he had spilled earlier. Kyle decides to go to a psychiatric hospital where Sarah is interned. Upon arrival, he is unable to get anything from the girl, and, as he is about to leave, she jumps on the sheriff, but is soon restrained. Eric informs that Frederick wants to speak with Kyle, and the sheriff goes to where Frederick is furious that several acts of vandalism have occurred on his property. Frederick shows various destroyed items, and Kyle takes photos of some areas where there is a green substance. Frederick and his son Jake accuse René Larocque of those acts, but Kyle says they have no way to prove it. The sheriff states he cannot do anything without evidence and leaves, but Steve warns him that there is something darker in that swamp and tells him to be careful. Kyle decides to return through the swamp to survey the perimeter and informs Eric, who quickly asks him to be careful. As the sheriff drives through the dark swamp, someone runs in front of him, which scares him. He gets out of the car with his gun and flashlight in hand to investigate, and while trying to find a clue, someone or something passes behind him, leaving him in shock. Kyle continues to search and decides to go deeper into the swamp. Meanwhile, Jake is in the office and begins to hear noises, so he decides to check, but first grabs a gun and asks if it is Larocque when he sees a shadow in the brush. He doesn't think twice before shooting and then decides to go after it, throwing himself into the swamp while Steve warns him to be careful. Meanwhile, Kyle is even deeper into the swamps when a shadow appears behind him and he quickly turns, asking the person to put their hands up. It is revealed to be René Larocque, and Kyle tells him to stay still, but the man keeps coming closer and the sheriff fires a shot in the air, making the man stop. Larocque tells the sheriff to leave or he will die. Suddenly, they hear gunshots, and when Kyle turns around again, Larocque has vanished. Kyle decides to investigate the shots. Meanwhile, Steve sees something in the shadows and, terrified, runs to the security room and locks himself inside. Inside, while trying to calm himself, the lights and soon the entire power of the place starts to fail, making Steve even more apprehensive. A shadow runs by outside, and Steve thinks it is Jake playing a prank on him. He hears a growl and decides to shoot, making a hole in the door. He approaches the hole and, looking through it, something destroys the door and Steve is thrown away. Meanwhile, Kyle returns to his car and, when he turns it on, the body of a man falls onto the windshield. The coroner tells Kyle that this is the former sheriff. The phone rings and he asks Kyle to answer it. It is Eric on the call, asking the sheriff to urgently go to the oil company. Kyle asks the coroner to go with him. Upon arriving, the sheriff goes to the spot where Steve was brutally killed and asks the coroner who would do something like this. He asks if it could be some kind of ritual, and the coroner replies that he has no idea. Kyle cannot believe that someone was killed with a branch in their throat, but the coroner explains that this is impossible, as the branch is coming from inside the body. Then the coroner mentions other bodies that were found 7 months earlier with swamp things coming out of them, just like Billy's. Kyle asks why this was not reported to him, and the coroner says that the former sheriff did not allow an autopsy to be performed, always asking him to register it as an alligator attack. Peter continues his strange rituals, and we see again that symbol he had drawn, now made with branches. During the night, Eric and Kyle are in a boat on the rivers searching for Larocque. Minutes later, they reach the swamps, when suddenly, the boat's engine stops working. While Eric tries to fix it, Kyle stands guard and urges him to be quick. At the same time, the brothers are also in the swamp, and Rodney tells Wayne that he needs to relieve himself. During this, he feels he is being watched, slips in the mud, but quickly returns. Unable to fix the engine, Eric and Kyle decide to row. The sheriff asks about Mike Plug, and Eric replies that he is a crazy man who lives in the swamp and has 2 canoes that might be useful. Kyle questions what Eric is afraid of, and he reveals the story of a sacred land where Larocque might be hiding, saying he will only take Kyle to the shore, as he fears for his life. Meanwhile, Wayne separates from Rodney in the fog, and, when he gets out of the canoe, feels something watching him. He tries to run, but gets stuck in the mud and a monstrous creature attacks him, piercing him with a branch. Eric and Kyle arrive at Mike's house, call for him, but as no one answers, they board the canoes. Eric comments that something is wrong and Kyle tells him to wait, as he is going after LaRocque. Eric, with apprehension, agrees. Meanwhile, Rodney searches for his brother but finds his brutally dead body. Suddenly he is caught off guard, also attacked and killed by the monster. Eric hears strange noises in the cabin and thinks it is Mike playing a prank. From a distance he sees someone and goes to investigate, not noticing that he is being watched by the creature. Kyle calls for LaRocque and warns him that hunters are looking for him. Further along, Kyle falls into a trap and LaRocque approaches with a knife, asking if he is also hunting. He remembers that he had already warned him not to return to the swamp. Kyle asks why he is killing people, and LaRocque says it is not him, that the swamp holds the answers. The sheriff comments that some believe he is innocent, but LaRocque replies that no one is, admitting that he convinced Frederick to buy the native lands. He says he thought that the money would help the tribe, and reveals that Salas never wanted to sell those lands. When Salas disappeared, Frederick began the exploitation right in the most sacred part, and now the guardian of the swamp wants revenge. Kyle mentions Mike, and LaRocque asserts that he has his own plans. Suddenly, they hear noises, and Kyle seizes the opportunity to break free. They fight, but LaRocque escapes, warning that if he returns, he will be killed. Eric finds Kyle, and as they talk, the monster appears behind him. Kyle tries to react, but LaRocque hits him and escapes. Unfortunately, Eric is brutally killed. Kyle wakes up sometime later and sees Mike taking photos of the body. He handcuffs him, but Mike insists that he was just gathering evidence and shows the photos. He takes Kyle to his cabin, as the creature may return. The images are blurred, and Mike says that this is the nature of fear. Kyle says it looks like a montage, but Mike says it is the swamp man and asks to take him to the station. The next day, Kyle seeks Elizabeth, informs her that Eric died, and asks her to take him to Peter. They go to his house, where he welcomes them. Kyle asks about LaRocque, and says he does not believe that Salas sold the lands to Frederick. Peter confirms and reveals that Salas was his son and knew the lands were sacred. Elizabeth tries to comfort him, and Peter recalls the times he took her there as a child, saying that place has light and darkness. He tells about the guardian that protects the link between realities, but now, with the machines in the swamp, is furious. Kyle asserts that as a police officer, he cannot believe in magic or ghosts, but Peter replies that he doesn't need to believe. The sheriff insists on knowing where LaRocque is, but Peter says he could be anywhere. Kyle claims to have seen the creature, and Elizabeth asks what it was. He says he doesn't know for sure, but Peter insists that he does know, and adds that the creature chooses who will die. Kyle asks who will be chosen, and Peter answers that everyone is going to die. He then asks them both to leave. Kyle goes ahead, and Elizabeth follows him, saying that he didn't need to do that. Kyle, angry, says he saw Eric die like a puppet. Elizabeth approaches, and they kiss, but they are soon interrupted by Frederick's arrival. Frederick asks if Kyle's job isn't to investigate, instead of flirting, and questions his connection to LaRocque, to which Kyle responds by asking what Frederick's connection to him is. Frederick admits that LaRocque once worked for him. Frederick threatens to remove Kyle from office, and he tells him to stay out of his way. Peter performs his final ritual and says that the killing ends today, setting out alone by boat. At the station, Kyle prepares to go to the swamp, and Elizabeth offers to go with him, but he says it's too dangerous and makes her promise to stay behind. She makes him promise to come back, and they say goodbye with a kiss. In the swamp, Peter is shaking a rattle and speaking in the indigenous language, while Kyle arrives at Mike's house. Jake and his father are also in the swamp. Peter continues his ritual until the creature begins to approach. It stops for a brief moment and watches him. Peter says he knows it and that he is not afraid, but the creature slowly lifts him and kills him by stabbing branches into his body, then transforms him into something different. At the station, the coroner calls Kyle, but Elizabeth answers, and he asks her to inform the sheriff that the former sheriff was killed by a gunshot. Frederick and Jake go deeper into the swamp and see a light in the distance. Frederick shoots, and when he approaches, sees it was Mike, but pays no mind. Jake is a distance away from his father and starts hearing noises, until LaRocque surprises him by coming out of the water and attacks him, leaving him unconscious. Elizabeth arrives in the swamps to warn Kyle, but the creature is already lurking. Kyle finds Mike's lifeless body, closes his eyes, and continues his search. He hears noises and soon finds Elizabeth, who informs him that the former sheriff was shot dead. Kyle responds that Mike was also shot dead and concludes that Frederick is behind everything and wants to blame LaRocque for the deaths. Elizabeth asks to take him to the dark waters, and with no option, Kyle agrees. On the way, he admits that Peter was right. When they hear noises, they run. At the oil machines, LaRocque is setting up explosives to blow everything up when Frederick appears from behind and orders him to stay still, threatening to shoot. The swamp is totally dark, and Elizabeth, terrified, tries to concentrate to guide Kyle to the dark waters. When Frederick is about to shoot LaRocque, Kyle and Elizabeth arrive and see the explosives. Frederick shoots LaRocque and then at Kyle. Elizabeth tries to warn Frederick about the monster, but he mocks the creature. When it appears behind him, Frederick tries to shoot, but it is futile. The monster grabs him and kills him brutally. The creature pierces an oil barrel and pours the liquid over Frederick's body, then throws him aside and advances against the couple. Kyle shoots, but it has no effect. LaRocque shouts for them to run, and in his last act, activates the explosives, causing an explosion that can be seen from afar. Kyle and Elizabeth survive the explosion, but realize that the creature is also unharmed to their despair. The monster roars and soon disappears into the dark waters of the swamp, reinforcing its role as guardian. They hug, aware that, although the human threat has been eliminated, the swamp still holds secrets and dangers.